The 80s were full of great metal albums, and today we're talking about some of the best. Coming up next on The Big Retro Show. The 80s and 90s were great times to be a kid. Join me as I dive into the world of movies, music, video games and toys, and explore what made these decades so great. This is The Big Retro Show. What's up, everybody? This is Los, and this is The Big Retro Show. And today I have a special guest host, my homeboy Frank.
What's up?
So today we're talking about the top metal albums of the 1980s. I made a list of my 5 personal favorites, and Frank also made a list of his 5 personal favorites. And today we're just going to talk about some good old-fashioned 80s metal. So back in the day, I didn't listen to a whole lot of metal. As a matter of fact, my favorite choice of music was rap and hip-hop. But there were few albums out there, actually quite a few albums out there, that transcended the genre. These were albums that everyone was listening to, even if you didn't like heavy metal. So number 5 on my list of the top metal albums of the 1980s is Def Leppard's Hysteria. What to say about this album? There were tons of great songs on it. The track listing is basically a soundtrack of the 80s. You got Hysteria on there. There's Pour Some Sugar on Me, which continues to dominate the 80s music stations today. And you can't forget about Love Bites when talking about this album. There was just so many great track listings.
I also like Rocket. It's a good song.
I think that the videos really complemented the album. What do you think about that?
Yeah, they had some good videos. A lot of very popular on MTV.
And it's that MTV generation that we don't get to see anymore, guys. I mean, nowadays MTV is just full of crap, to be honest with you.
Reality TV.
But back in the day, it was all about videos and music, and I really miss that. That's one of these retro things that I think really needs to make a comeback. My next pick for the top metal album of the 1980s is Twisted Sister's Stay Hungry. This album too had tons of great songs. I think my favorite song off of this album is Burnin' Hell. I can't think of a more evil song during the 1980s. So spiteful, so metal, so good. Another good song off the album is the classic We're Not Gonna Take It. Who can forget this video with the dad just totally berating the son, and the son finally gets fed up, and you know what? He's not gonna take it anymore. And on the softer side of things is my next pick for the top metal albums of the 1980s, Whitesnake's self-titled album, Whitesnake. I think my favorite thing about this album is the video for Here I Go Again. And I think a lot of the 80s kids will agree with me that this was one awesome, hot video. Who can forget Tawny Katane dancing all over the screen and basically giving this video life. It was one of the best videos of the 1980s, and I think it really catapulted Whitesnake into the metal scene of the 80s and put him on top. Another good song off of this album was Is This Love? Yes, this was a power ballad, but you know what? Sometimes you need power ballads on metal albums. And my number 2 pick for the top metal albums of the 1980s is Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood. I think my favorite track on this whole album is Dr. Feelgood. It tells the story of Jimmy, basically. He's a low-life scumbag and drug-dealing guy who is running around selling drugs. I really like the imagery, and I think that the video does a good job of representing the song. Another good song off of this album is Kickstart My Heart. This song is very impressive to me. I really like the guitar work on it. It's detuned, which means it's tuned down a step, and you can totally tell in the production of the song that they took extra special care when recording the guitars.
Bob Rock produced that album. He also produced the Black Album.
If you guys have Netflix, I highly recommend the movie The Dirt. It tells the story of how Motley Crue came to be and how they became one of the biggest bands of the 1980s. And the top metal album on my top 5 list of heavy metal albums of the 1980s is Van Halen's 1984. This is the album that got me into metal music. I watched the Jump video on MTV like almost every single day. I really liked the keyboards used in the song, and I know that metal purists were kind of angry at Eddie Van Halen for using the keys, the synthesizers, but I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. Another good song on this album is Panama. The guys look like they're having so much fun on stage in the video. You have David Lee Roth swinging back and forth on the stage, Eddie Van Halen shredding his guitars, and the rest of the band just really having a good time on stage. And I think that this is one of the videos that really sold me on the album. The last song I want to talk about on the album is Hot for Teacher, and oh my god, the video for this song. I guess every adolescent kid that watched this video became a fan of Van Halen after watching this video. The way that Hot for Teacher starts kind of reminds me of a truck warming up, and then it just builds up. Eddie Van Halen's artistry, his work on the guitar for this song is so impressive. It kind of reminds me of a little bit of Eruption when it starts. And then everything just crunches in and the music kicks in. And that great sound by the frontman, obviously David Lee Roth, tells us how he's hot for Teacher. So I think that this song has a lot going for it and definitely is one of the gems of 1984. Now that you know my top picks for the metal albums of the 1980s, it's time for Frank to show you what he has on his list.
Okay, so my first pick was AC/DC, Back in Black. Came out in 1980, very good stuff. The song itself, Back in Black, very powerful. It's the first album that they did after Bon Scott died with Brian Johnson. Really good guitar work. Another song on that album that I really liked was Have a Drink on Me. Did you ever see that movie Beer Fest? Every time I hear that song, it gets me pumped up.
I will definitely have a beer on you.
It's a good song, fun track to listen to. And then, of course, You Shook Me. Everyone knows that song.
Absolutely, it's one of these songs that you always hear at the bars, and everybody always goes bananas when they hear it.
And it's a song where you may not think you've never heard AC/DC before, but you've heard that song before.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another good song on the album is Hell's Bells. So if you've ever been to a Raider game, you hear that bell ringing, you see the boys come out the tunnel, and it's time to go. You know what I mean?
Yeah, except I won't say anything about the Raiders because you know what?
You like the other side of the bay.
Yeah, I'm a 49er fan. You guys know this.
Yeah.
All right.
But all in all, it's a good album. So next, I went with Ozzy, Wizard of Oz. Can't go wrong with that.
Classic album.
Yeah, Randy Rhoads, Ozzy's first album after Black Sabbath, so he had something to prove, so he came at it strong. Of course, everyone knows Crazy Train. It's a very good track on that. Mr. Crawley, surrounded by great musicians. Randy Rhoads, one of the best ever to do it. Died too young.
Yeah, man, R.I.P.
Yeah, only got a couple albums with Ozzy. But then he had Jakey Lee in the 80s too. Another great guitarist, and Zakk Wylde there at the end of the decade. So he did alright, but Randy was probably the best out of all of them. I'd have to say Mr. Crawley is my favorite to listen to. Crazy Train is the most well known. Number 3, I went with Metallica. I went with Kill 'Em All because that was the first album I had. Although Master of Puppets might be a little better, but I prefer Kill 'Em All. My favorite's Four Horsemen. Then Seek and Destroy, No Remorse. From beginning to end, it's a great album. You can't go wrong with any track.
Hey Frank, I have a question for you.
Huh.
Do you think that Metallica made a mistake when they dismissed Dave Mustaine?
So I'm glad you said that, because it leads me to my next album, Peace Sells. One of the best albums Megadeth has ever made.
Yeah, and didn't he make this album kind of like as a revenge album against Metallica after they kicked him out?
He had a revenge career against Metallica after they kicked him out.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
This is one of the best albums, and if anyone's ever seen MTV News, they've heard the bass line to Peace Sells, the song itself. So the guitar work on this album really shows the true talent that Dave Mustaine has. He really knew how to play the instrument back then.
Yeah, and it's just a shame that it all went down with Metallica the way it did. And I think that Metallica wouldn't be the same Metallica that we have today. It would be totally something different, but it sounds like Dave Mustaine, especially when listening to Peace Sells, really bounced back from that dismissal.
Another good song on that album is Wake Up Dead, which, you ever been hanging out with your friends and coming home late at night, you can relate to what he's talking about. Okay, and then my number one pick for albums in the 80s was Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. This is the album that made me want to play guitar. First time I heard Slash playing solos, made me want to learn how to play guitar solos. My favorite one to listen to right now is probably Night Train, but the first one I ever saw, video, heard was Welcome to the Jungle, and that's where they got me. Because the 80s was happy times and fun. They come out singing about, hey, life isn't fun in the city. And it just had a different perspective, and it had a different sound compared to all the other stuff that was being played on MTV at the time. And they looked a little different too, they weren't as glammy.
So tell me about the darkness of this album, Frank.
Well, they have a song, My Michelle, which is about a prostitute. Song, Mr. Brownstone, it's about a drug dealer. Song, Crazy, it's about a crazy ex-girlfriend. So they're talking about things that they've seen in the city that happen that it'd be kind of a shock if you lived in the suburbs and moved down to the slums of LA.
So these are like real life themes that they're talking about, not like anything medieval or, anything that like something that you would probably hear in a Led Zeppelin album, Stairway to Heaven or whatever. These are like actual real problems that they're talking about in this album.
Real problems that they went through and saw trying to come up.
And that's gonna do it for our list of the top metal albums of the 1980s. Obviously, we can't list all of the albums, and we would like to know in the comments, what albums did you think were the best metal albums of the 1980s? As always, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell so that you can get an alert when I upload a new video. Also, look for me on social media, Facebook and Twitter. I love connecting with you guys on there. And until the next one, I will see you on The Big Retro Show.